Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it one more minute and start right at 12. Just to check, can everybody hear me actually? Should I... Yeah. Hi, Gretchen. Hi, Carol Vincent. Okay, welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I am Dr. Lisa Carter-Bawa. A few housekeeping points. We welcome questions and we'll be collecting them in the chat. Please feel free to type your question in the chat at any time during the presentation. We're going to collect them and try to answer all of them at the end. In addition, we do have you muted during the presentation, but you're able to raise your hand and we can unmute you during that portion. So a few of you I know, but there are several that I do not know, and I want to thank you for being here. But I also want to say if I were sitting in a webinar focused on grantsmanship and grant writing, I would want to know who the heck is teaching me this. So let's get that taken care of first. I'm Dr. Lisa Carter-Bawa. I am a behavioral scientist. My focus is on patient-provider communication and stigma, specifically why people who are eligible for lung cancer screening do not get screened, even when it could save their lives. I have spent my career studying what happens to a message between the person delivering it and the person receiving it. And that space in between where meaning gets distorted, where intention gets lost, and where the right information somehow becomes the wrong understanding. That's where I live professionally. I also direct a population science institute where I lead a team of wonderful behavioral scientists, data scientists, health communication researchers, and implementation scientists. And I've been and am principal investigator on over $22 million in funded research. So I've been through this process many, many times from many, many angles. I've written the grants, am writing grants actually currently, and I've reviewed them. I've sat in study sections and I've watched what happens when good science meets the realities of human cognition. So I didn't set out to teach grantsmanship. That is not my field. But what happened is I kept watching the same thing play out with the scientists on my team and people that I mentor. Brilliant people with strong ideas writing applications that didn't land. Not because their science was weak, but because the reviewers were receiving what the writers intended to communicate. I realized that the same exact translation dynamics that I study in patient provider are operating in the grant review process. So I built Lost in Translation, first for my own team to help them write clearer, more compelling grants. And what I learned in that process is the foundation of everything I'm going to share with you today. So let me tell you a story about a translation failure. I've spent my career studying why people don't get screened for lung cancer, as I mentioned in my opening, even when it could save their lives. And the answer is never that they don't care. It's never that the information is not available. The answer is that somewhere between what we say and what they hear, the message gets lost. So a physician says, you should consider screening. The patient hears judgment about their smoking history. A public health campaign says early detection saves lives. The person who used to smoke hears, well, this isn't for people like me. The words travel across the space between us, and by the time they arrive, they become something else entirely. This is the translation gap. And after nearly 20 years of studying it in healthcare, I see it everywhere, including in grant applications. You know exactly what you mean when you write your aims. The logic is clear in your head, the significance is obvious to you, and the innovation is apparent. But the reviewer reading your application at 11 p.m. does not live inside your head. They're processing your words through their own expertise. their own assumptions and their own fatigue, frankly. And somewhere between what you wrote and what they understood, something got lost. The grant gets triaged, not because your science was weak, because the translation failed. And the key message here is that the same dynamics that prevent people from getting life-saving screening for lung cancer are the dynamics that prevent good science from getting funded. In both cases, the problem is not the message itself, it's what happens to the message as it travels from one mind to the other. So by the end of today's masterclass, you will understand the 5 specific places where that translation breaks down in grant applications. And you'll have a concrete method you can apply to your very next submission starting today. Now, let's talk about what most people do when their grant doesn't get funded. They go to a grantsmanship workshop, and what do they learn? They learn templates. They fill in the structure, they use these phrases, they follow this format, and that approach treats the symptom, not the disease. Yes, structure does matter, but structure without understanding is just performance. And reviewers can smell performance from across the room. So let me show you what I mean. There are 3 mistakes I see over and over again, and I want to walk you through each one because I think you'll recognize yourself in at least one of them, because I know I did. Mistake number 1 is writing for yourself instead of for your reviewers. You know your science so deeply that you've lost the ability to see it through fresh eyes. You skip steps that feel obvious to you but they're not obvious to a reviewer in a different subfield. You use shorthand that makes perfect sense in your lab, but means nothing to someone scanning 10 applications in a weekend. So here's what this looks like in practice. Imagine you study health disparities in lung cancer screening among immigrant communities. You've been immersed in this work for years and years. You know the screening guidelines, you know the barriers, you know the cultural dynamics. So when you sit down to write your specific aims, you jump straight to your innovation, your intervention, your theory of change, the thing that you're really excited about. But here's the problem. Your reviewer might be a biostatistician or an epidemiologist who studies cardiovascular disease or a health services researcher who's never worked with immigrant communities. They don't have your context. And when you skip from lung cancer as the leading cause of cancer death straight to your multi-level intervention framework, you've lost them. Not because they're not smart, because you forgot that they don't live in your world. So I call this the curse of expertise. The more you know, the harder it is to remember what it's like not to know it. And that curse shows up on every page of your grant. So if you've ever gotten reviewer feedback that said something like, the rationale is unclear, or the significance is not well established, and thought, but it's right there, this is the mistake. It was there for you, but it wasn't there for them. So mistake number 2 is performing grantsmanship instead of practicing it. So you've been to the workshops, you've learned the formulas, something like the long-term goal of this research is, or this hypothesis is, the rationale for the proposed research is. You know the phrases, you've memorized the structure, but you're performing these phrases without understanding why they exist, which means when something doesn't fit the template, you're stuck. And worse, when you do use the template, the result reads like a form letter. It is technically correct, but it's emotionally flat. So let me give you an example. I've read hundreds of specific aims pages that start with some version of. There's a critical need to better understand the factors that contribute to ... That sentence is not wrong. It's not even bad, but it's also not yours. It could be anyone's grant. It could be about any topic. And when a reviewer reads a sentence that could belong to anyone, they don't lean forward. They don't lean in. They don't think this person has something important to say. They think, here we go again. So the difference between performing grantsmanship and practicing it is the difference between filling in a template and understanding what each section is supposed to do to the reviewer's brain. The template tells you what to write, but translation tells you why you're writing it. And that why is what separates applications that get discussed from applications that might get triaged. So if your Ames page sounds like a grant, but doesn't sound like you, like if you couldn't read it out loud to a colleague without feeling slightly robotic, you're performing. And the reviewers can tell. So mistake number 3 is letting the stigma of being new make you defensive. So this one is really personal for me because I study stigma professionally. Early career investigators carry a particular kind of shame. It's like that sense that they haven't earned the right to ask for funding yet. And that shame leaks into your writing in ways that you cannot even see. So here's how it shows up. You hedge everything. Like you say something like, we will examine whether this approach may potentially contribute to improvements in. Count the qualifiers in that sentence. Examine whether, may, potentially, contribute to improvements in. 5 layers of distance between you and your own claim. That's not scientific caution, that's self-protection. Or you overcompensate in the other direction. You use words like groundbreaking and paradigm shifting and first of its kind because you're trying to convince the reviewer and maybe yourself that you belong. But overclaiming triggers the same alarm as hedging does. It tells the reviewer that you're not comfortable with where you actually are. Or you overjustify your preliminary data. You spend a page and a half proving that your pilot study was rigorous enough when the reviewer just needed 2 sentences and a figure. The volume of justification communicates anxiety, not confidence. Reviewers are extraordinarily good at detecting clarity in writing. They do it unconsciously, and when they sense it, they don't think this person needs encouragement. They think this person isn't ready. That is not fair. I'm not saying it is fair, but it is how human cognition works. And understanding that is the first step to fixing it. So if you've ever written a sentence and then immediately softened it, like added a may or a potentially, or we will explore whether, not because the science required caution, but because you were afraid of sounding too confident, that is stigma talking, and it is costing you. These 3 mistakes cost early career scientists years, not months, years. Every review cycle is 6 to 9 months minimum. If your application gets triaged because of a translation failure and you spend another cycle resubmitting with cosmetic changes that don't address the real problem, that's a year and a half. 2 failed cycles, and you're looking at 3 years of your career where your research did not move forward, your participants didn't benefit, and your trajectory stalled. Not because your ideas weren't strong enough, but because the message didn't land. And here's the part that no one talks about. Each triage erodes your confidence a little more, which makes the stigma worse, which makes the next application more defensive, which makes the next triage more likely. It is becoming a cycle, and it's a cycle that has nothing to do with the quality of your science. So what I've discovered through my own research on communication failure and through reviewing hundreds of grants is that there are 5 specific places where I've seen these translation breakdowns. I call them the 5 translation gaps, and once you see them, you can fix them. So I'm going to walk you through all 5. For the first 2, we're going to go deep. I'll give you a method and a real example. But for gaps 3, 4, and 5, I'm going to give you enough to recognize them and start working on them, and the full curriculum covers each one in detail. So translation gap number 1 is the gap between your thinking and your writing. You understand your research so deeply. I mentioned that earlier, but understanding and articulation are different skills. Most applicants skip straight to grant language without first clarifying what they actually want to say. The result is prose that sounds like a grant, but doesn't really communicate like one. So think about it this way. If I ask you right now to explain your research to me over coffee, you could do it. You would be clear, you would be compelling, you tell me the problem, you tell me why it matters and what you're going to do about it. You wouldn't use phrases like, the long-term goal of this research is, you would just simply tell me. But the moment you open a Word document and start writing an Ames page, something shifts. You start performing. You start writing in grant speak. And in the process of putting on that formal voice, you lose the very clarity that made your explanation compelling in the first place. That's gap number one, the gap between what you know and what you write down. And it's the most common reason grants get triaged because applicants skip past their own clarity and go straight to that voice that isn't theirs. So, okay, we are going to do something right now, not later, not as homework, right now. I know webinars usually aren't interactive, but I'm just different, I guess. I need you to grab something to write with. It's a paper, your phone, a notes app, whatever you have. I'll wait. If you could just like nod and let me know that you're there. Um, Okay, so here is the exercise. For those of you, because there are some who are joining me who actually have the curriculum, this is going to be repeat for you. But the exercise, I call it the coffee conversation. I want you to imagine you're sitting with a brilliant friend who works in a completely different field from you. They know nothing about your area of research, but they're smart and they're curious and they genuinely want to understand what you do. So over coffee, they ask you one question. What are you working on? I want you to write your answer in 2 to 3 sentences only. Here's the key. You cannot use jargon. You cannot use grant language. No performance. Just tell them what you're doing and why it matters. Write it exactly as you would say it out loud. I'm going to give you 90 seconds and I'm going to be quiet while you do it. Go. I always love your timer music, Anna. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. 90 seconds is actually longer than it feels like when you're on a Zoom call and you try to be quiet for 90 seconds while people do something. But welcome back. So now I want you to look at what you just wrote. I want you to compare it mentally to the opening paragraph of your last grant application. Which one is clearer and which one would you actually want to read? If you're willing, drop your sentence or 2 sentences in the chat. I'd love to see what came out from some of you. You might surprise yourself. Uday says I'm working on new ways to treat tuberculosis. The current treatments do not work well, and this results in 1 million TB deaths each year. Thank you, Uday, for sharing. That's really clear and interesting. I'm actually going to share one that I wrote early on as well. Okay, Natalie. We're working on a program to improve sleep in long-haul truck drivers. They are extreme shift workers, and poor quality sleep negatively impacts their health. Perfect. And I'm going to drop in the chat one that I did a while back, which is 14 million Americans qualify for lung cancer screening each year, but the people who need it most, people who smoked, people in under-resourced communities, are the least likely to get it. I'm trying to change that. So that takes about 10 seconds to write, really. No jargon, no hedging, and it's clearer than most Ames pages when you start doing the grant speak. That's the coffee conversation. That is your starting point. Most people find that their coffee conversation version is clearer, more compelling, and more honest than anything in their grant. And that's because you were communicating rather than performing. What you just wrote, that is your starting point. It's the clearest version of what you actually mean. So your job is to write your grant without losing that clarity. And here's the practical application. Before you write or revise any section of your grant, do the coffee conversation first. It's something I actually go back to personally every grant that I do. It takes 60 seconds to do, to say it out loud or write it in plain language. Personally, I'm an auditory person and a visual person, but hearing things makes me understand them a little bit more. So I actually read it out loud to myself. Then translate that into your grant, not the other way around. If you start with the template, you'll lose yourself. But if you start with clarity, you'll keep it. You don't need reinvention. You need a return. The clearest version of your grant already exists. It's the version you would explain to someone you respect. So your job is to translate that into writing without losing its clarity. So translation gap number 2 is the gap between your words and their meaning. So let me show you what this gap looks like in a real application. I'm going to read you an opening sentence, anonymized but real. This is from a grant that was triaged. There's a critical need for innovative, evidence-based interventions that address the multifaceted barriers to health behavior change among underserved populations. That sentence could belong to 1,000 grants. It says everything and nothing. A reviewer who's reading this at 11 p.m., their eyes glaze over. There is no human problem. There is no specificity. There's nothing that tells the reviewer why this application or why this investigator or why this question matters right now. So let me break down why that happens. The applicant knows exactly what they mean. In their head, underserved populations means a specific community they've worked with for the past 5 years. Multifaceted barriers means 3 specific obstacles that they identified in their preliminary data. Innovative means a real methodological advance that they're proud of, but none of that specificity made it onto the page. The words are placeholders for meaning that only the writer can see. Now, here's what that same investigator wrote after we worked on closing this gap. Each year, 14 million Americans are eligible for lung cancer screening, but fewer than 6% are screened, and the people who would benefit most are the least likely to be reached. Same investigator, same science, completely different experience for the reviewer. The second version creates urgency. It has a number, it has a human consequence, and this is the key. It makes the reviewer want to read the next sentence to find out what's going to happen. That's what translation looks like. So notice what changed. We did not add complexity. We added specificity. We replaced abstract language with concrete language. And we answered the question every reviewer is asking in the first 10 seconds. Why should I care about this? The words you choose either build bridges to reviewers or construct walls. Jargon, hedging, overclaiming, these are not just style issues. They're translation failures. So when you write utilizing a novel paradigm, you think you're being precise. The reviewer thinks you're hiding behind big words. When you write this groundbreaking approach, you think you're showing impact, but the reviewer thinks you're overclaiming. The gap between what your words mean to you and what they mean to a reviewer is where trust is either won or lost. Translation gap number 3 is the gap between your logic and their understanding. Your specific Ames page has a job, and it is not to summarize your research. It's not to demonstrate your expertise. Its job is to build comprehension, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, so that by the time a reviewer finishes it, they understand your problem, they understand your approach, and they understand why it matters. And they're ready to advocate for you in a room that you never step into, that grant review room, Zoom room nowadays. There is an architecture that does this. I call it the four paragraph architecture, and the full curriculum walks through that in detail. But I want to give you the core structure right now because understanding what each paragraph is supposed to do will change how you write it. So, paragraph one is the problem. This paragraph has one job: to create urgency. By the end of this paragraph, the reviewer should feel the weight of the problem, not just know about it, feel it. This is where you use that specificity we just talked about, the numbers, the human consequences, the gap between what exists and what's needed. If your first paragraph does not make the reviewer think, someone needs to fix this, it has not done its job. Paragraph two is your approach. Now that the reviewer feels this urgency, you step in with your answer. This paragraph says, here's how I'm going to address this problem. Here's the theory behind it. And here's why this approach has promise. This is where your preliminary data lives, not as proof that you're rigorous, but as evidence that your approach works. The reviewer should finish this paragraph thinking, that's a smart way to tackle this. Paragraph three are the aims themselves. This is your roadmap. 2 to 3 aims, clearly stated, each one a logical step. The reviewer should be able to read your aims and immediately understand the trajectory of this project. If they have to reread your aims to figure out what you're actually proposing, the translation has failed. And paragraph four is the impact. This is the paragraph most people get wrong because they treat it as a summary. It is not. This paragraph equips your advocate in the room for you. Remember, your reviewer has to walk into a room, a Zoom room nowadays, and argue for your application in front of 20 other scientists who haven't necessarily read your entire application, maybe just skimmed your aims page. This paragraph gives them the language to do that. It answers the question, if this project succeeds, what changes? And here's the core insight. Each paragraph has one job. When you try to make a paragraph do 2 jobs, when you bury your innovation inside your problem statement or you scatter your significance across all 4 paragraphs, comprehension breaks down. The reviewer can't follow your logic because you're asking them to track multiple threads at once. So one paragraph, one job, that's the architecture. Translation gap number 4 is the gap between your confidence and how reviewers perceive you. Here's something counterintuitive. Being new is not a weakness in review. It can actually be an advantage, but only if you frame it correctly. Reviewers know that early career investigators need funding to build their programs. Most reviewers actually want to support new scientists. What triggers skepticism is not inexperience, it's defensiveness about inexperience. So let me show you what I mean. Here's a sentence I see a lot in K Award and early career R01 applications. The hedging version says something like, while limited, our preliminary data may suggest that this approach has the potential to contribute to improvements in screening behaviors among some populations. Now, I want you to count the escape hatches in that sentence. While limited, may suggest, has the potential, contribute to improvements among some populations. The writer is so afraid of overclaiming that they've drained every drop of confidence from their own finding. A reviewer reads that and wonders why they should believe in findings if the investigator doesn't even believe in them either. Now, here's what grounded confidence looks like. The grounded version would say something like, our pilot data from 84 participants demonstrated a 23% increase in screening intention following the intervention with a statistically significant p-value, with the strongest effects among participants who had never been screened. Same data, completely different signal. The second version does not overclaim. It doesn't say groundbreaking. It doesn't say paradigm shifting. It says, here's what we found. Here are the numbers, and here is who has helped the most. That is not arrogance, that is clarity. And that's what reviewers trust. So the formula is simple. State what you did, state what you found, state what it means. No qualifiers that you don't need, no apologies for your sample size, no hedging that wasn't scientifically required. When your writing shows self-awareness, proportionality, and evidence of mentorship, reviewers lean in. When it shows overcompensation or hedging, they pull back. Translation gap number 5 is the gap between a rejection and your next submission. Your summary statement is not a verdict. It's a diagnostic. It tells you exactly where the translation broke down if you know how to read it. Most investigators treat a rejection as a reason to feel defeated. And I'll personally say early on, I used to tell my postdoc mentor when I would get a rejection that I had 24 hours to have a pity party. And I remember one time I got 2 grant rejections and one manuscript, desk reject. And I told her I had the whole weekend to have a pity party. But as I mentioned, most investigators treat that rejection as a reason to feel defeated. They read the summary statement once, they feel terrible, and then either give up or make surface level changes and resubmit. Both of those responses waste the most valuable document you'll ever receive in the grants process. Here's what I want you to do instead. I want you to read your summary statement as a translation map. For every critique, I want you to ask 3 questions. Question 1 is, what did I write? I want you to go back to your application and find the exact text that the reviewer is responding to. And then question 2 is, what did they understand? Read that critique carefully. What did the reviewer think you meant? Not what you meant, but what they understood. And then question number 3 is, where's the gap? The distance between what you wrote and what they understood is the translation failure, and that is what you need to fix. So let me give you an example. A reviewer writes, the innovation is not clear. Your instinct is to think, but I described the innovation on page 7. And maybe you did, but if the reviewer didn't register it as innovative, the problem isn't that they missed it. The problem is that your framing did not position it as innovative by the time they got to page 7. Maybe they needed to see it earlier. Maybe they needed it connected to the gap. Maybe the language was too tentative. The funded investigators I know do not treat critiques as insults. They treat them as translation data. Here's what I said. Here's what they heard. Here's how I close that gap next time. That shift from they didn't understand me to I didn't translate clearly enough is the shift that turns a rejection into a roadmap. And the key synthesis here is that grant writing is not a performance, it is a translation. So your job is to close the gap between your understanding and theirs. When you make that shift, everything changes. So now you understand the 5 translation gaps. The question is, what do you do about them? So you have a few options. Option 1 is do it yourself. You can take what we've talked about here today and apply it on your own. You can try the coffee conversation method before your next draft, audit your current aims page for the 5 gaps, read your last summary statement with those 3 questions in mind. This video will be going out to everyone who's registered, whether you're here or not. This will genuinely help. I want your next submission to be stronger, regardless of what you decide to do next. And option 2 is walking through the full curriculum. I built Lost in Translation specifically for scientists who are tired of the guessing game. So it's a 14 module curriculum with 13 companion workbooks over, I think it's like 265 pages of companion workbooks that go with the modules. They're not templates, they're frameworks that you apply to your specific science. The coffee conversation method is just one of those frameworks. The full curriculum actually contains over 50 frameworks. It covers everything translation gap with mechanism-specific strategies for R01s, R21s, R34s, and K awards, and all align with the NIH Simplified Review Framework, and you get lifetime access. But I personally use it, and others who are using it before every submission cycle to help. So the founding price for this is $297. through May 16th. And after that, the price goes to its regular price of $497. This is the lowest it's ever going to be. For either option, if your institution has professional development funds or training grants or faculty development budgets, it's an eligible expense. And I'm happy to personally email you a justification letter template for that purpose. And for those of you who want something more, who don't just want the curriculum, but want to work through it with me and a small group of peers late summer, I'm actually opening a founding cohort that's going to run 5 Mondays in August, timed to the October 5th NIH deadlines. So it's 5 weeks, limited to 12 people with live coaching calls and a personal Ames page review from me. So if that interests you, applications are currently open and we'll drop the link in the chat. But one more thing I want to mention, because I built this curriculum because I believe the translation problem is fixable. But I also know that cost can be a barrier, especially for postdocs and for scientists at under-resourced institutions and for international scholars who are navigating these systems with very little support. So I've created a Lost in Translation Founders Scholarship. It provides full access to the entire curriculum at no cost. There's no partial awards, there's no strings. If this work matters to you and cost is the thing standing in the way, I want you to have it. There's a brief application. It takes 5 minutes. It's trust-based. I'll include the link in the follow-up email, and I award a small number each quarter, and I read every application myself. I do not want cost to be the reason good science stays lost in translation. I did not build this curriculum to get rich. I built it because I've watched too much good science go unfunded due to translation failures that are entirely fixable. Whether you enroll today or simply take the coffee conversation method and run with it, I want your next submission to be different. Not because you learn new tricks, but because you learn to close the gap between what you know and what reviewers understand. So I'm going to drop 2 links in the chat right now. One is to course enrollment page and one to my website where you can learn more about Lost in Translation. And this QR code on the screen also takes you to the same place. So if you have any questions about any of this, the course, the cohort, the scholarship, anything, you can reply to any email from me because I read every one of them. And at this point, we're going to kind of not close, but we're going to open it up for questions that you might have. And we can unmute people, I believe, Anna.
Participants are now free to unmute themselves and ask questions either vocally or in the chat.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much. This was really helpful. I am someone who really reads your work religiously on LinkedIn and also on the website. And quick question about, I know you mentioned the inaugural cohorts, but is this something you intend to keep doing, or you're just piloting it and then would figure out? Just because I have nothing going in this, cycle, but I do know for sure the next cycle, like early next year, I'll have something going in. So just wanted to ask.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So actually, this is something I'm piloting it and doing it is because I actually do institutional cohorts. So I currently have an institutional cohort that's finishing up. We actually have our last session on Monday with a group from the Mayo Clinic, and I have a group that's actually starting from the University of Southern California in a couple of weeks. And one of the things I was talking about with my colleague, Dr. Vielma, was I just started thinking about the fact that what if people wanted that more? But they are not at an institution who's doing a formalized cohort with me. I thought, well, I would see if there was interest to actually do a cohort and bring together people that could form their own cohort for multiple institutions. Does that make sense? Oh, and to actually answer your question, so we'll see if there's interest. Absolutely. This will be a recurring thing. To me, it makes the most sense to do it tied to leading up to an NIH grant, one of the 3 cycles, because I think that would be helpful. But I'm also open to feedback and different things of that nature. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay, absolutely. And I did see there was a question in the chat. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that the chat's going uh, crazy. Oh, here's a question. This is from Carolyn Kearns. She said, she conducts education research operating under interpretivist assumptions, not a biomedical model. What recommendations do you have for research that cannot make strong claims about the results? That is why the study is being conducted. Absolutely. I'm not referring to pilot studies. Human behavior is not 100% predictable. Modern grant reviewers seem to prefer a guaranteed outcome, not science that generates new knowledge over time through studies with non-statistically significant results. This is such an important question. And I should have also revealed in my intro, I'm actually a mixed methods researcher. So every question I'm a clinician, I'm a nurse practitioner, and did my PhD after practicing, actually owning my practice for a while. So every question that I tend to ask always has a qualitative human component. So I'm very cognizant of both qualitative and quantitative. It's such an important question and one that doesn't get enough honest airtime, Carolyn. You're naming something real. The review process, especially at NIH, has structural preferences for predictive frameworks, and that can create a genuine disadvantage for research operating under interpretivist or constructivist assumptions. The language of hypotheses or expected outcomes bakes in a positivist logic that doesn't always map onto how knowledge is generated in your tradition. But here's what I've seen work, and this is a translation issue, not a science issue. The key is to reframe what you're offering the reviewer. You're not promising a guaranteed outcome. You're promising rigor, a clear logic of inquiry, and a well-defined contribution to knowledge. The reviewer needs to trust that your study will produce something meaningful, even if the specific findings cannot be predicted in advance. So a few concrete moves that I would think about is leading with the problem, not the method. Reviewers across paradigms respond to urgency. If they feel the weight of the problem before they encounter your methodological framework, they're more willing to follow you into this unfamiliar epistemological territory. Also, being explicit about your assumptions. Don't hide them. Reviewers get suspicious when they sense a paradigm they can't place. Like, think of it like a sentence like, this study is grounded in an interpretivist framework, which prioritizes understanding meaning-making processes rather than predicting outcome. It does enormous work, and it tells the reviewer that I know what I'm doing and I'm doing it on purpose. And then I would also advise replacing the language of with the language of contribution. So instead of something like we hypothesize that, try something like this study will generate new understanding of, or this study will illuminate the processes by which you're not hedging in that type of language. You're accurately describing what your science does. And finally, I would say anticipate the objection in your significance section. You can name the tension directly. And this actually goes for not just this situation. Sometimes when I appreciate most apparent when there's multiple ways to do things. When you say in when you say in your grant that we considered X, but we decided to go with Y because of Z, you can name the tension directly. Like while randomized designs can establish whether an intervention works, they cannot explain why, they cannot explain for whom, or under what conditions. This study addresses that gap. That's where I would see your work doing. So the reviewers who push back on non-predictive designs are not always being unfair. They're often operating from a framework where they genuinely do not know how to evaluate rigor outside of a positivist model. So your job is to translate your rigor into language that they can recognize without abandoning your own paradigm to do it. And that's exactly the kind of translation problem that Lost in Translation was built for. But thank you for asking this. It deserves a much longer conversation, and I'm sorry if I just kind of went off on a tangent there. Is there another question? Oh, Natalie, to confirm, yes, you will get the recording. I will, everybody who registered, whether you registered and you're here live or you registered and could not attend, an email will go out with the recording. Okay. Okay. I believe in being efficient. We don't have to take up the full hour. It is 12:44. If there are any more questions, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes and give you answers back. But I appreciate everybody being here and listening to my perspective on grantsmanship. Oh, Jenny asked for the cohort. The deadline for the cohort is um, July 12th, I believe it is. I'll send it out in the email, but I think it's July 12th. Thank you, guys. Oh, July 7th. Thank you, Anna.
I have just one question. I'm sorry. So
No, no.
the cohorts that you work with, is it
Mhm.
working through, step by step, like, maybe you write your specific aims, you come through, you review it together, you get feedback, right? You go back, you work
Mhm.
to, building up to the deadline. Is it, that hands-on, or it's just, I've been to a couple where it's just, you get, oh, this is what you're supposed to do, and then that's it, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's so what we do is hands-on. So it's so we take two modules. I don't reteach. Like I don't come with slides and reteaching. I'm not lecturing to you because in the actual curriculum you have the video module where I've taught there, plus the comprehensive companion workbook. So each meeting that we come together is 90 minutes of live application, interaction, real-time feedback, doing exercises that actually help you get clearer on your thinking, and of that nature. So it is very, very hands-on. It actually would be, it would have been I just mentioned this as passing, but it would have been good if I could have given you like some testimonials from the people who actually are currently going through the cohort because it's been very valuable. We do real-time feedback on the aims. I will tell you the first three sessions are really focused on that early piece and getting the aims page really down because that's the most important document in your entire grant. And the if you're writing an RO1, the 12 pages that follow for the research strategy all flow from the actual specific aims page. So if you have a very tight specific aims page, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier to write all of this components into the research strategy. Um, and actually with the cohort, I do a deep dive diagnostic on every piece that as you come and you build that aims page and then you build into the research strategy, we do that in between the work. Like you give it to me, I do the diagnostic. So that's something you actually get back from me. So it's not me telling you go do this, go do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thanks.
Hi, Lisa. I want to ask you a question. So you mentioned different frameworks potentially depending on what grant you're doing, like an R21 versus an R01. So I've
Yeah.
applied previously for an R21, which did get funded, and now I'm looking to do an R01. I was wondering if you
Yeah.
could comment like on perhaps are there any like blind spots I might need to be aware of as I shift from experience with an R21 to now doing a R01?
Yeah, no, I think you're actually in such a great place because essentially you're doing, so is your R01 building off of the work that you're doing currently in your R21?
Yes, yeah, very much
Okay.
so.
Okay. Yeah,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think I think that's really the translation gap that I've seen most with people who write an R21 not an R20, write an R01 from their R21 is not conveying what you did, why you did it, and what you found, and how that supports this next step. Because the R that R21 is going to feed into the preliminary data and support the why of
Yeah.
like you found this, you tested something or you did something or maybe you developed an intervention of some sort in this R21, which has led to now needing to do a fully powered intervention trial or what have you.
Yeah.
So the biggest translation failure I've seen in that transition is not adequately um, writing that into the grant and framing it both in the aims page as well as the actual research strategy. You really want the reviewers to know early on, hey, we did this, we asked this question, we answered this question, this is what we found, and this is how it told us to go down this next path, and this is why we're doing it. It's your whole justification for the larger trial. Congratulations on your R21, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this was interesting. You suggest that it should be incorporated into the specifics aims page, not just something you like I would bring up in the R01 and the 12 pages, like as far as preliminary data, like you're saying it
Yeah,
should be
but
stated.
you're not going to do it like it's not going to be a very long thing. It's only going to be like a two sentences that's going
Right.
to be in
Yeah,
that
it's
structure.
not
Yes,
enough. Yeah.
exactly. Because it
Right.
also so you want to think about the fact that for those reviewers who are just reading your aims page because they're in the room and they get an equal vote as the assigned reviewers do, you want to be able to show them that this is not just a new idea. This is something that's building off of something that you've done, and the choices that you've made for this particular study design are informed by the work that you just did.
This
Does that
did.
make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah. No,
And
that
that
does.
that helps with it. Yeah.
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 Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for being here and taking the time in the middle of a Friday.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you guys for being here. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. I'm going to stop the recording.